I'll do it. Or we could rotate it again.
That's always so confusing, though. You never know who it is. And it doesn't make that much difference. It really don't take that much, but,
Well, we started that rotation just because everybody, it was that time everybody had done it, and he's kind of.
No, he's that role.
I heard anybody's feelings.
All right, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Ask Jerry Hendricks from First Baptist Church to do the invocation and Commissioner Peak to do the pledges.
Good to see everyone this morning in recognition of National Teacher Day. I do want to pray for those who have influenced us past, present, and future. Those are some of our key influencers. Let me pray. Lord, we thank you so much for this day and the opportunity to serve this community in a variety of ways. Lord, I thank you for each person that's in this room and ask that you give them a special blessing today and also bless their families. God, we are thankful for the teachers in this community and surrounding area, Lord, those that have influenced us. God, many of them are responsible for us being in this room today. God, we thank you for them and ask that you bless them and help us today in this week as we honor them. God, we thank you for those that serve this community. God, that those that stand in harm's way for us, we pray, Lord, that you give them safety. And God, you continue to protect them and their families. Lord, we have business to take care of today. We ask, God, that we glorify you in all things that we do. We ask that you watch over us as we make these decisions. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
please join me in the flag of our nation and our state. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'll now call this joint meeting of the Sweetwater City Commission and Sweetwater Enterprise for Economic Development to order. We'll now move to item 1A, which is discuss, consider, and act upon a resolution in ordering canvassing the returns and declaring the results of the May 5th, 2018 special election. Ask for a motion from the commission.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I'll now read the resolution into the record. A resolution by the City Commission and the City of Sweetwater, Texas, canvassing the returns and declaring the results of the special municipal election held on May 5th, 2018. We'll now move to item 1B, which is discuss, consider, and act upon a resolution appointing board members to the Board of Directors to the Sweetwater Municipal Development District.
If I may make some comments, with the original election we had back in November, we assured the voters that we would be essentially using the same board for both bodies. The rules of operation that we're going to be looking at adopting here in just a little bit say that board members will serve from October 1st to September 30th. And so given that, I think we don't have a whole lot of option but to make these appointments as interim appointments from now until the end of September. We will need probably to appoint one of the board members as president so that they can call the first meeting. And so I would move that we make appointments. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm just going to end that just with my comments. I'm not comfortable appointing myself.
Okay.
Well, I move that we appoint those that are listed and it be for a period until September of this year, when at that time we reappoint for the staggered terms.
Second.
Okay, do we want to add the president into that amendment? I mean, into that motion?
We should need to add Billy Wisnat,
Okay.
as president to
I'll
continue.
Same president, same board members and everything, okay. Okay, got a motion, a second?
Second.
Hey, David.
All in favor?
Well, David just stepped out. Okay, Emma.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And now we need to appoint
Okay.
So are we gonna leave that one position vacant for our?
I would
Someone
like,
let him speak because I don't hear anything.
okay.
Give us just a minute.
I would like to, in the same vein of operating the MDD board as closely as we could to the seed board, and keep in mind that by tradition, that's always been the bank seat that we're appointing somebody to. I would recommend that we keep it that way, and we've had discussions within the seed board about whether we want to keep that policy or not, and I'm in agreement that we do, and I would like to nominate Joseph Crouch, the president of First Financial Bank. I know he's very new to the community, but I visited with him at length, and I think he'll make a good board member. He's really excited about the opportunity to serve.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Now read the resolution into record. Resolution adopting the members to the Board of Directors to the Sweetwater Municipal Development District. Now therefore to be resolved, I, Mayor Jim McKenzie, and the City Commission of the City of Sweetwater hereby adopt the resolution appointing members of the Board of Directors to the Sweetwater Municipal Development District on this 8th day of May 2018. We will now move to item 1C, which is discuss, consider, and act upon a resolution approving rules of operation for the Sweetwater Municipal Development District.
I believe we have Mr. Santee on the line who's going to lead us through this discussion on the rules of operation. Dan?
Yes, sir. Good morning, council and newly appointed board of directors for the development district. So, a little bit of difference here between what you might be accustomed to with the corporation, being that we operate under bylaws. Just to avoid any confusion, we refer to these as rules of operation. As you know, the district's a political subdivision. I know there was some desire to keep the seat name because you've got a lot of time and effort invested in getting that out there. And so what you'll see on the front here on the cover sheet is that we will refer to it as the Sweetwater Enterprise Economic Development Municipal Development District. And while that's a lot, we have to use the Municipal Development District tag on anything that we file and officially do through the state. But as far as we're concerned, you're free to continue using SEED as your marketing name and on all of your things. No need to change all that out. So that's why we kept that here. My understanding was that there was a committee formed between current members of the board that were on the 4A Corporation, as well as Mr. Vela and representatives from the commission, to go through the Brownwood Rules of Operation and make recommendations. I took those recommendations into consideration, went through the same rules of operation that Brownwood had put together, made some adjustments that where your situation is different from theirs, and also just some provisions that I felt were unnecessary or that were missing were put in here. Fairly minor, and so this shouldn't take a lot of time. Just wanted to go through this and make sure this is kind of what both the governing bodies want to see in here. Now the district cannot take any action on these today, but the council can. The board will need to post a meeting with 72 hours notice and go from there. But we can get at least the council's take with the board present and have consensus before that happens. These are just blanks that y'all can fill in on your end as far as the registered office and agent. The purpose is straightforward. It's defined in statute. What I will say though is that I think it's important to reiterate, and we talked about this a long time ago when I first came up there and we started kicking this idea around. Remember that, you know, these guys, your board of directors now is unshackled from the provisions of 501 through 504, so they are free to. There's really not a lot of rules out there for them other than these rules of operation. They can go after economic development opportunities that your neighbors down the road cannot, and in ways that your neighbors down the road cannot. And so, while it's good, it's an excellent advantage for Sweetwater. Just bear in mind that these rules of operation are I guess, in a sense, any type of limits that you want to place upon the district in their efforts. And I have not written a bunch in here because I guess my feeling is you would want to keep that as broad as possible so that they can engage in as many types of activities as their imagination will dictate. But any limitations that we want to place would be here. And also within the interlocal agreement that we'll discuss later. On the board of directors, this is my understanding of what y'all have chosen to do or would like to do. Now there's the appointments that just took place. It's my understanding that the desire is to have those interim appointments, and you will make your 2-year appointments on October 1st. If that's not the case, we'll just adjust this. We can adjust this here. They will have staggered terms starting out. On C, eligible for reappointment or up to 4 consecutive terms. No director shall serve more than 4 terms.
I guess a question to the others, that is a little bit of a change because it had been 3-year terms with the limit of 3 3-year terms. What's the rationale for 2-year terms rather than 3-year terms?
State law.
Or was it state law?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the local government code 377051 states that directors serve staggered 2-year terms, and so we really don't have a lot of say in that.
Is a 4-year 4-year terms part of state law? Is that just our local wishes?
That is your local
Okay.
limitation that you placed in there.
Okay.
The vacancies, resignations, and removal. The provision in here is that any director may be removed from office by 3 affirmative vote of the city's governing body at any time without cause. And throughout this, just a note. I mean, I've referred to the city as the city's governing body simply because we're in the process of trying to have that designation changed from commission to council. So unless we want to amend these again after the charter election, I just went with governing body. But it's no big deal. It's up to you guys how you want to refer to that. On the other comment I received had to do with the executive director. So this is it's kind of up to the council and the board how you want to designate this. I went with executive director as opposed to a chief executive officer. It's not a corporation. It's a political subdivision. Typically, districts use confirmed directors. It really your board is a board of directors, and so this is the executive for those directors. So it's the term executive director. It doesn't really make a difference to me. Just was trying to avoid any confusion with the designations typically used with corporations. Now, the other part of this that we'll get to a little bit later is the well, let me go ahead and jump down here. On the president of the board, the president is the principal executive officer. and it talks about shall be in general charge of the properties and affairs of seed. I had some questions relayed on that as well. Again, this is also how I believe Brownwood had theirs set up. This is how most districts would be set up, because it is a being a political subdivision, that you're always going to have a president of that board. You may or may not always have an executive director, depending on retirements or changing, people changing jobs or folks coming and go. So the authority of the district lies with the president, who is elected from the other directors and designated to sign off on all things for the district. I don't think that should be viewed as taking away any authority from whomever is the chief executive or the executive director, but rather it's a matter of continual operation of the district, and making sure that the president is the one who is the final say in the signature on things. Because in your board rules here, you'll see that if the president is unable, then it's the vice president. I mean, you have kind of a list of succession of who can do things in the absence of the president. So just wanted to jump down and touch on that real quick. The other thing on this is in the let's see, in A, the board, subject to confirmation by the governing body, shall hire an executive director. Now this is what was already present in here. There are a lot of options on this, and there's a lot of, y'all need to have that discussion. It's not my decision, and it wasn't the subcommittee's decision. This is just, I believe, the language that was present. It's not how I would recommend doing it, because it's not how it's currently done. Like right now, my understanding, and David or Ken, if he's to correct me if I'm wrong, but right now the employees of SEED are city employees. They're hired and work under they're under all the personnel policies and everything of the city. And it's my understanding that the desire is that they be able to maintain everything that they have already as far as retirement and benefits, so they're not looking to change from being city employees. I would not change that designation, and I would not keep this provision here. I think that the better arrangement, at least which would most closely mirror what you already had in place, would be to discuss on the interlocal agreement, which is an interlocal agreement between the two political subdivisions to provide those services. And it would most closely mirror what's in place now with the district, rather than the corporation reimbursing the city for those costs of having those folks employed. Now, how y'all choose to write this as far as the decision making, it doesn't have to be here. It would be more appropriate in the interlocal as how is that person chosen, as far as the board having input, or the board making the decision with the city manager's input, or whatever it is. And here it should focus more on just what is the role of executive director, as opposed to how they are hired and put in place. But that's for y'all to discuss and decide today.
Question.
Yes.
Should we strike the sentence in 205A, the executive director shall be an employee of SEED?
Yes, I think so. I would recommend yes. I think that the intent was that they remain employees of the city. If now, as a district, I mean, certainly you always have that option. If the decision at some point is the mutual decision or determination between the city and the district that, hey, you guys need to have your own employees, that's fine and good. There's just so much that goes with that may not have y'all haven't had to deal with before, which is getting in place personnel policies and manuals and getting everything set up to actually be an employer. Right now, contractually, you do that. The city's your employer of record, and they provide all of those, and it's a pass-through to the corporation. We would envision that being the same with the district, but that's not how these rules of operation were originally written, and that didn't come to me with those recommended changes, so I left it. and figured we would talk about it. You always have that option though. You can always retain people, you can always contract with people. So what we could do here is remove
Well, it says with the consent.
Consent of the
Well, it
executive.
says seed shall hire, seed's not hiring. The city is.
Yeah, well, that's what he's got up there now. The governing body shall hire. He's just changed.
Oh, okay, I wasn't reading that.
Consent of city.
I wasn't reading that.
Okay, so I made some changes, if you want to see if that better captures what you currently have.
You need to say an employee of the city, wouldn't you?
He says governing body.
What is that, an employee of the governing body's an employee of the city?
Dan, there's some talk up here about whether the governing body or the city manager
Okay.
shall hire the ED for seed with the consent of seed. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it needs to be the city manager as it is now. Okay, are you comfortable with that? On B, for the employee, I don't know, how many employees are there other than the executive director?
One additional.
Okay. So that's something that can still be adjusted, but this does make the major change of it being or maintaining the current setup with it being a city employee.
So Dan, you're saying that if Seed wanted to be the sole hiring authority for the executive director, for example, they'd have to be the employee of record, which means getting their own retirement, their own personnel policies, their own insurance, et cetera, et cetera. Is that
Well,
correct?
Not completely accurate. If they want to be the sole person making the determination as to who that person is, I mean, they can certainly do that, but the city has to be willing, I mean, the city's gonna be the employer of record, and that person is going to, fall into the structure that the city has in place, which, you know, it's not, it wouldn't be unlike the situation that they had at one point, and I don't know if they still have or not, in Abilene, and where you had the board hiring a director, but they weren't the employer of record, and it just can cause some issues, because you can't have a circumstance where that employee is without supervision or doesn't have policies and procedures that they're held to. And so the city is still going to be the employer of record, but the city didn't have any decision making or input on who that person is. So it's really up to you guys how you want to structure that. I think it works well if it's a mutual type of understanding, or, you know, I mean, it's right now everybody's, I think, comfortable, as far as I know, with the arrangements you have and the people that you have. So this is really more about what's to come, other than if you don't want, if there's, what's the reporting structure now? So, like, I mean, Ken's a city employee, so he answers to the city manager.
Ken takes direction directly from his board at this point.
Okay, so if Ken violates city personnel policies, what happens?
That's where we're stuck. Yeah.
I don't know if Ken's there. I'm not trying to make Ken uncomfortable at all. These are purely hypotheticals.
Well, you're doing
I'm just
a good job.
trying to understand how we're going to deal with the next person who may not be. You know, I appreciate taking direction from the board, but the city manager is the head of the entity and all employees report to the city manager either directly or through someone else. So we need to make sure that we have some type of coordination and on anything such as that when it comes to the executive director. Because the other employee's seat is going to take their direction from the executive director, as they should. That's just like, I guess my feeling is, looking at it in this structure, is Ken is the director of economic development, period, for the city and by contract for this district. But if the city manager decides, hey, the city wants to do a 380 agreement and participate, well, I would think that we would all expect David to go to Ken and say, you know, here's what I need you to do on this, or here's what I want you to do in this, because that's the world that Ken works in. And so the city manager, I would think, has to be able to give direction and correction if necessary to whoever's in that position. But that's just my thoughts on it. It's been working for y'all the way it is. Understanding that, you know, attorneys only work in worst case scenario worlds. That's all we think of.
Well, Dan, I think the way it has been, and again, this is just historic view, is that the board hires, but it's still city council final approval before that person's actually hired. So when I was offered the position from the board, it still had to come to the city, and the city council had to approve that before it made it official.
Okay. Well, okay. Well, we can continue that conversation as to how y'all want to structure that. I mean, you're understanding, you know, that the interlocal agreement, which is the next thing on the list, is going to define the services, because that is, if the district and the corporation before it, if they are not set up to handle payroll and to have policies and procedures for employees and to have retirement, have all those things, they're completely dependent on the governing body in the city to provide those things. And so if I'm the city's attorney, I'm advising the city, you know, don't assume all the risk that comes with an employee that you have no authority over. That's that's a problem waiting to happen. So, however y'all set it up, or however that person comes on board is just whatever the two entities agree on. But once that person is on board, they are subject to the authority of the city manager. They have to be, because they're all of the liability policies of the city are the policies standing behind that person's actions. Unless, it's set up differently. For example, like housing authorities, and we did do this in Abilene, where the housing authority was a division of the city. They were all city employees who transitioned to where they were not. And the housing authority is an independent entity now out there, and they have their own legal counsel, all their own insurance, personnel policies. They're employees. They're the employer of record. And at some point down the road, the district might decide to go that way, but they're not equipped to do it today. But they have that ability. Understanding though that the governing body is always going to have the ultimate hammer, and that the governing body makes the appointment of the board of directors. So let's talk about that more, that whole setup when we get to the interlocal, and then we can always loop back. I can loop back with David and make changes to this section here, because I don't think anybody's in disagreement. It's just a matter of trying to adequately protect the interests of the city as well as the district in how those decisions are made, because you both have risk. If it's okay with everyone else, can we move on through the rest of it and discuss it later?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So on meetings of the board, I had a question about meetings and can they take place away from the city. The way the code reads is you're supposed to meet in the city. It says in 377053, the board shall conduct its meetings in the municipality that created the district. And so, anyway, so that's why it has to be, now it does say, or in such other places, but it does have to be within the city. It doesn't have to be City Hall.
Well, my question on that was, what happens when we have a quorum at some type of convention or exhibition or special meetings outside of the city? To have a quorum, you have to have a meeting, and there has to be some type of an exception for those
Right.
quorums of when the board gathers together.
Or legislative session, something like that. That's already an exception in the act, because you're not there for now. You can still violate the Open Meetings Act. Don't get me wrong, but it doesn't have to be posted, because you're not there for purposes of deliberation under the act. But you would not be able to have a posted meeting outside of the city, where the board of the district could not have a posted meeting outside of the city limits.
You couldn't post it and specify that no business will be discussed? I'm just trying to protect the board from the open meeting requirement if they gather together with a quorum at an exhibit or a convention.
Yeah, it's not required. You don't have to post that. It's not a meeting. If you don't get together and have deliberation, there is no meeting. So those are not posted. Attendance at social functions and legislative sessions and conferences are already an exception within the act that do not require posting.
Dan, is the ETJ included in the definition of city in this?
It does not say that. It just says within the city.
Since
So it
this is
doesn't say
actually,
within the boundaries of the district, which is what it should say,
okay.
but your legislature did not include that. It just says municipality. It should say I agree with you, it should say within the boundaries of the district, because your district includes the ETJ.
Thank you.
Alright, anything else on meetings? Attendance, this is just, these are the rules of the district, so they can change these parts any way they want. If it's not in the statute, it's just open to whatever, however you wanna, what standards you wanna hold yourselves to. This is just an attendance requirement, and you can't miss, 3 consecutive absences or attendance constituting missing 50% of the meetings over a 12-month period. A majority of the board shall constitute a quorum. And an act of a majority of those present constituting a quorum will be an act of the board. No proxy votes. One thing about.
Dan, I want to go back to
Yeah.
2.07. Can we put an exception in there for missing 3 consecutive meetings for excused absences or illness or sickness? The way it's written seems very hard and fast.
Well, immediately
Right,
before
so
that, it says
we
the
can
following
put
number of
unexcused.
absences may constitute.
Okay, thank you.
So there's an allowance there.
Okay, thank you.
So do y'all wanna leave unexcused or remove it?
No, it's fine if we got the word may in there.
Okay. Yeah, that, if we put something like unexcused, then we have to have a process, and I can't recall if your commission has that, as a lot of cities do, where they excuse the absences at the next meeting of a member who was absent the time before, because they have provisions in their charter or in their rules of operation that require it to be an excused absence. On conflict of interest, this is a change for what to, because they are now going to fall under chapter 171, the same as the commission when it comes to conflict of interest. Before they did not, because they were a nonprofit corporation, so they were governed by the Non-Profit Corporations Act, and very different conflict of interest provisions, and they were not bound previously by 171, which is much stricter. So they will want to familiarize themselves with those rules. It really shouldn't hamper their activities, but it is something they need to be aware of, because they do have to now file affidavits, which they, unless some local rule required it, they were not required to do before.
So Dan, are you saying that each board member on each appointed term should sign a affidavit concerning this conflict of interest?
Well, what it means is that, so, and the commission is bound by this now, so what happens is if an item comes before the seed board where the company, or for whatever reason, you have an interest as defined under chapter 171, or someone within some degree of consanguinity or affinity has that interest, and there's a definition whether it's 10% of income, or it can be property ownership. If you have any of those defined conflicts, then prior to that, the council taking action, or the board taking action on that item, you would need to file an affidavit with the board secretary abstaining from the discussion and the vote on the matter.
All right, thank you.
And, my guess is your commission already has that affidavit that they use that will be adapted for the seed board's purposes. And what we can do going forward too is I can make sure Ken has, we've got a lot of little checklists or cheat charts that we use for public officials that I can make sure Ken has for the board. So it's a real easy conflict determination using a diagram, and it's actually available online, but I'll make sure that the board has that so they can quickly make determinations.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. So under general duties of the board, again, these were present in there. It alludes to some of these things in the statute, but these are not specifically stated in the statute. The one thing that is specifically stated in the statute is the need for a development project fund, and that will be something we address through an interlocal as well when the funds are transitioned to the city, when the assets go to the city from the corporation, and the city earmarks those to and puts them back to the district, the city will do so with an interlocal that requires they be placed in a development project fund set up by the board. So that's not addressed here, but it will be addressed in the interlocal. So this is more towards the something that you probably have already been doing as a 4A. You were probably already providing these updates and plans to the city's governing body and having an annual plan, and so that's what's still captured here. Uh, 211 is just referring to the relationship with the city's governing body, and it does reference the interlocal agreements entered into with the city and budgetary and fiduciary responsibilities of the board. The interlocal agreements are a big change for SEED, but they're also a big opportunity because the city's not the only governmental body in your area. You can interlocal with the county, you can interlocal with any other MDD or any other city or county or school if there's a way to benefit your district. So it's a good opportunity, it's a good vehicle to use. On the board's relationship with administrative departments of the city, this is just, again, this will be, you'll have an interlocal agreement for services. This is just stating that if the board or the board's designee, which would be your executive director, has a need that can be filled through a department within the city, then you do have the right to make that. You can make that request. You can access those departments. For example, when the board needs to make a purchase, if you needed something, you could use the city's administrative departments to acquire that from by board or wherever, because you will have an interlocal agreement for services. Section 213 is just your implied duties, similar to what we have in the charter for the commission. That unless there's something not prohibited by the act or the rules of operation, if it's something that's allowable, you have those implied duties, even if it's not stated in these rules of operation. This is probably what you already do. You need to have select a president, vice president, secretary to serve each year. And those would be held at the regular meeting of the board in the month of October. Now, obviously, it's your very first meeting here that you'll schedule after today. You're going to need to go ahead and get those elected to serve until October. And then you can reappoint them or do whatever you need to do in October.
Dan, one question on the secretary position. Since traditionally the SEED secretary treasurer had been the one that signed for SEED on any of the checks, does that need to be designated or is that being changed?
No, that's not being changed. Let's see. I think yeah, right here, I think that's the same because the secretary shall have charge of seats, books, records, documents, instruments. Now you do have that the accounting, financial records, and securities are with city finance director. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure. Are you just talking about signing off on the checks themselves?
Yes,
think that's
right.
Because the corporation, the secretary is in the corporation, the secretary is bound to do that.
Okay.
So I don't. we can set that up though. I mean, there's nothing that says you can't do it the exact same way if that's how you want to operate. Because I guess the way to look at it is you're just no longer bound by those requirements, but you're welcome to keep or maintain as many of those things that you want to maintain. You can run this however you want to run it, honestly.
Well, I think one of the things we've been able to do of being very transparent is whoever signed off on the invoice would not be the person that signed off on the check from the seed side. It still went to the city. They still had a number of checks and balances and another signature on top of it. It just seems as if that makes one more person accountable to the process.
Okay.
Just as a question.
Sure. Yeah. No. And you know, the thing I guess from my perspective is the internal operations. I'm not going to know, and we're not anticipated in putting this together. And so, the idea with trying to get everybody at the same table was for what things like you just mentioned. I mean, if what's reflected here is not going to be adequate or be the preference of the board on how you do certain things, then we just want to make sure that we capture that. And whether that goes in the rules of operation or if that goes in your financial policies or an internal policy that you adopt, that's something that you can determine. I mean, was that in your bylaws as a corporation, how that happened?
I don't think so. I think it was a internal process.
Just kind of looking down through here and seeing. So right now, the way this, so right here on finance and accounting, so let me back up right here. So this is the project fund that I referred to. And that's required, the development project fund is required under the statute. And so this goes through, you know, all your funds are gonna go through this particular fund. And any revenue that comes in goes into the development project fund. When the city moves the fund balance from the corporation through the city back to the district, this is where it will go. And you can have different accounts obviously within that fund, but that's what everything, when the city accounts for the district's funds, this is how they're going to do that. And these are all the things that you know, it can be used for, and it's fairly broad. And these are not, these are set out in the statute as well. It's in 377.072. So 1, 2, 3 in the statute are reflected here as A, B, and C. And now this provision, and I'm going to loop back to your question on how the signings take place. And the reason why is because when we get down here to finance and accounting, it's set up a particular way, and that's where that change might have to happen.
Okay.
Under annual budget, the way this states is that you guys will, the district will submit a budget to the city, be included in the annual budget presentation to the governing body. And it also has this provision on the end. This is not in a statute, right? This is just something that's in here. Any proposed expenditure not included in the budget that exceeds $15,000 will require approval by the governing body. That's not required to be in here. That's something that's been placed in here. And I don't know, honestly, if that was in Brownwoods or if that's a change that was made through the subcommittee. The finance director is the one who has custody of all funds and securities, and director of finance shall endorse for collection on behalf of seed checks, notes, and other obligations and deposit the same to the creditor of seed in such bank or banks or depositories that shall be designated by the board. Sign all receipts and vouchers for payments made to seed. Required by the board, render a statement of seed's cash account. If you you want to arrange this differently, you can. And that's something that just needs to be, discussed between the city and the district as to how you want those things handled. And if there needs to be a different step in this process, or if there's, someone from the board that's going to be more involved with this, or if you're gonna delegate that to the executive director. Down here is, this right here is where, so all checks, drafts, or orders for payment are signed by the president or such other person as designated by the board.
That takes care of that.
That covers it.
Okay, well, I apologize, I wasn't certain what level you were currently involved with, but yeah, if this covers it, yes, the president or anybody y'all designate, so,
The advantage of that is, as we've talked, is that you have a minimum of 2 seed board members, that know about every request for check of any kind. And that way it's.
right,
Go ahead.
and the other part of that is that the finance director is going to have to report back to you, monthly on finances and what payments have gone out and what has come in. So I think that what this would require would be, you're gonna get, when you meet monthly, you're gonna have a report, which you probably do as a corporation already. You'll have a report from the city's finance director that shows your cash flow, in addition to any other checks and balances that y'all put in place on what's coming in and out, just on the signing of checks and things.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. I think that covers, up here, there was a question on this, on ex officio members. So the mayor and city manager or his or her designee may attend all meetings of the board or committees, including closed session, with the consent of the board and board council. I changed this a little bit from the way it was written in Brownwood, and we can certainly discuss this and write it however the two boards want. And typically, it's the mayor and city manager, either one of their designees may attend. I don't know that I'd ever put shall attend. I mean, you can't really make them attend, and things come up and happen, and I don't know that you need somebody there. Now, the city manager's designee might be the finance director, because if they gotta give a report. But as far as closed session, this is one of those things that, can often, cause, I guess, dissent between the two, but I represent EDCs and I represent MDDs and I represent city council, and there are times when, I may or may not want and believe me, I have this argument with other attorneys in my firm, but I may or may not want a mayor or city manager present in a closed session if I need to advise the board. And I understand that they're appointed by the council, but it just sometimes, just because of the conflict rules and things such as that, the city doesn't necessarily have to know everything. At least at that point, it may not be appropriate, or it may not be the time for that. So I always put with the consent of the board and board council, but you don't have to place that on. You don't have to place that. I'll tell you, I've seen it when it's not there, and I've seen board members become very uncomfortable discussing something. Here's a scenario. So here's a hypothetical that, and it's more than a hypothetical. It's a real world scenario. Let's say that the board makes a deal. Okay, if everybody were making these deals, folks would just go to banks. So these deals often involve risk. So you make a deal, and it has begun to go sideways, but nobody knows about it yet. You just have gotten the information, and there's the need to meet in closed session with your legal counsel to discuss what your options are. Well, we may not want whatever designee is present to be included in that conversation just yet, because we don't know what course of action we want to take. Not trying to keep stuff from the city, it's just at that point in time, that conversation with your legal counsel, in that legal counsel person's mind needs to be without other people present. So anyway, that's my soapbox, and you can leave it or take it, take it out. The city will know eventually. They always do.
In the 10.5 years I've been here, and I don't think before that, I think the city manager was always welcome at every meeting, including all closed sessions.
Yeah, right. And we probably would, 99.9% of the time when we go into executive session, if you go into executive session, it's gonna be fine. There's always that chance that your legal counsel will pull the president aside and say, do you mind if we don't allow the designee in, because David couldn't be here today, so he sent, I'm not going to say a name because I'm going to offend somebody, so he sent someone else, and I don't think they need to be part of this conversation. That's really what it's aimed at. Because what would generally happen is that the board president, after the whole board is briefed and a determination has been made on what direction they want to go, my guess is that board president or legal counsel is going to have a separate meeting with the city manager and the mayor to say, hey, I want to give you all a heads up, we're going to need to brief the entire commission in the next executive session, because here's what's going on with this deal that we made. It's just a more controlled approach to getting that word to where it needs to be. Because at the end of the day, it's if one of these deals goes sideways, the city can't really help the district. I mean, the district's going to have to stand on its own in any kind of legal situation that it has to handle, and so it doesn't serve much purpose other than keeping them in the loop at some point on what that's going to be.
I'm comfortable
All right.
with the way it is.
I don't think there's anything else that's out of the ordinary here. So your investments, I'm sure it's going to be very similar to what was already being done with your funds. They have to follow under 2256 Public Funds Investment Act. Same thing with bonds. Now, down here on auditing procedures, I had a question on such audit shall, maybe you do in shall instead of may. It makes sense while the city is while the city's acting as your financial agent, fiscal agent, that it be the same firm. It's gonna save you money too if it's the same firm. So it's up to the commission. If y'all want that to be shall, we can change that to shall.
I think that needs to be shall.
Is that the consensus?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because these can always be amended. You know, if at some point the district is independent from the city in those respects, then they can always amend this. Nothing here is different. I mean, this is talking about your books and records and the fact that everything is subject to public information. It always has been, even as a corporation, so that's really not anything different. You are a governmental unit for Tort Claims Act purposes. B is just a limitation on what the indemnification directors would cover. That's also no different than what you've already had in place, whether you do it or not. Insurance, ethics, and amendments. Any questions on any of these last provisions? So really, it seems to me like the only outstanding issue is just how the district and city handle the employee of record situation as far as hiring. You don't have to have the final answer of that today because you already have someone in place. It will be, it is addressed to some extent in this interlocal agreement when we get to that on your agenda. Is that the next thing on your agenda?
It is.
Okay, so we can hold the remainder of that conversation for that.
Okay. Do we need to have a vote on this then? Is that what we need?
Dan, are we to the point where we can approve these rules of operation as revised today?
Yeah, so yes, sir, you are. What the commission will be doing today is approving these rules of operation and sending them to the newly appointed board of directors for their consideration. Now, the MDD board is welcome to look at them in as much detail as they want at their meeting and have discussions, and they can always send them back to council for a second time with changes that the council could approve or not approve. But yeah, that was the idea, is to get these approved in some form, understanding that the district still has to accept and approve them.
Do we have any concerns from our newly appointed MDD directors at this point?
On section 205, how was that final decision on striking that sentence about employee of C? Did we decide to completely strike that sentence, or?
So David, is it on a screen there?
It is.
We can see
Okay.
it.
So with the changes you made, that's the way we're deciding now?
That's,
So currently, yes. So currently, if they voted now without any further changes, the city manager shall hire an executive director with the consent of C to act as C's chief operating officer. The ED shall be an employee of the city, be charged with the responsibilities of carrying out C programs as adopted and planned by the board, responsible for day-to-day affairs, and C shall recommend a salary and benefits for the executive director. And then very similar for the employees, except it's the executive director with the approval of the board and city manager may employ such personnel as may be necessary, so on and so forth. So if you want to change it, I think what you would want to change is the first sentence. As far as right now, it says the city manager shall hire. If you want that worded differently, as far as it not just being with the consent of C, which I guess that should say the board.
but Dan, really all we're doing is approving this to send it to them, and then they could make the changes and send it back to us the way they really want it then, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, the hope was that having the joint meeting, y'all could work through a lot of that, but yes, certainly they can absolutely make additional changes. I don't know how much they've had a chance to review this, so yes, they can make any changes and send them back to the city for consideration.
We reviewed it and discussed it yesterday.
Shouldn't that first sentence state that the city manager approves of the selection by the board in some form of legal jargon?
Did you pick that up, Dan?
Shouldn't that first sentence state in some form that the city manager approves of the hire that's been selected by the board?
Well, so, I mean, technically the city manager is the one hiring because the board can't hire a city employee. So all the board can do, the most the city board can do is recommend a person to the city manager. But the actual hiring has to be by the city manager to see.
Okay. Thank
Or,
you.
or
So
could
the
you
way
ju-
I wrote it was the city manager shall hire, but we could reverse the sentence if it sounds better, say the seed board shall recommend to the city manager, an executive director, or.
To be
I don't know.
hired.
I mean, you could rework that first
Yeah,
sentence though. if
that's hair splitting, so.
I like that better. Cause I think the seed board ought to be the one who selects, the seed director.
And from a practical standpoint, any manager will tell you if, and I know the process would have been gone through by that point, that candidates would have been vetted, a candidate would have been selected probably by a 5-0 vote. I get the paperwork and I sign it. And that's kind of what we're looking at, and we did discuss that at the seed board meeting yesterday. So in my mind, from a practical aspect, that's how it would probably go. I wouldn't be doing the recruiting and, hey, let's come work for Seed. It's a great time. That's not going to happen from a practical standpoint.
The seed board shall recommend to the city manager and executive director to be hired to serve as Seed's chief operating officer. Does that sound better?
That gets you where you want
I like that better.
That's good, thank you.
I move we approve the, rules of operation.
I'll second
with
that.
the changes specified to be sent to the seed board for their final approval.
to. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
I will now read the resolution into the record. A resolution adopting the rules of operation for the Sweetwater Municipal Development District. Now therefore to be resolved, I, Mayor Jim McKenzie, and the City Commission of the City of Sweetwater, Texas, hereby adopt the resolution adopting the rules of operation for the Sweetwater Municipal District on the 8th day of May, 2018. We'll now move to item 1D, which is discuss, consider, and act upon approving the interlocal agreement with the Sweetwater Municipal Development District. Okay?
And y'all should have not the services agreement, but the interlocal agreement. And if you don't have one, we'll get you a copy.
Here's an extra.
So, there was a little bit of confusion, I think, on my part, and David and I had a chance to visit when he was in San Antonio last week, that Ken had contacted me about a services agreement, and so I put together a services agreement from the aspect of, I thought they needed one for wrapping up the corporation, for winding up the corporation between the city and the corporation. So I didn't know if they had one in place, but after further discussion with David, I think this interlocal is really what was an issue, or what was being referenced, and that is the services to be provided by the city to the municipal development district. And rather than a services contract, which nothing says you couldn't do a services contract, but with an interlocal agreement, there's more flexibility for the city as well as the district, because the city can provide in-kind support if it so chooses, and if the situation dictates, because it's the theory being that you can provide goods and services between two governmental entities, even if no money were to change hands. And I know that's not the intent, because the city's the actual employer of record, but for other little things that come up along the way, when you have this in place, it's just a better vehicle to define rules, roles, and responsibilities between governmental entities. So the first part are just your legislative findings, and saying that both parties have the authority to enter into this agreement under state law, and that they desire to enter into this, and that previously served as the employer of record and fiscal agent when Seed was a Type A economic development corporation. The purpose is in essence to continue those things for the provision of economic development programs that mutually benefit the parties and serve a public purpose. Since it's an interlocal agreement, it does have a term. The way I've initially written this is that the initial term will expire on September 30th, but it automatically renews each year unless terminated for successive one-year terms that run concurrent with the fiscal year. It can be done differently. It's just that it makes sense for it to go on a year-to-year basis because of the fact that both governing bodies have to approve budgets anyway, and so this just accounts for that with the fiscal year when it comes to the fiscal management aspect. Because the city has, I guess for example, the city would need to let the board know, of the district know, of the increases to their budget on the personnel side for the coming budget year, and the board needs to have time to consider that and understand that, what those might mean. And by the same token, if the board gets halfway through the initial year and decides, you know what, we really, our activity's really picked up and we need additional staff, they would need to be able to talk to the city and say, can we get more folks on this serving our purposes, and that wouldn't have been budgeted, but the city would have with an interlocal in place. Both parties have the opportunity to do that, but it's good to have it year to year. The board will want to look through on this fiscal management disbursement, and this is something that new director of finance needs to look through as well. This deals with the development project fund, and it ties in the rules of operation to this as well on fiscal management disbursement. Personnel management is going to be something that we might need to tweak. So the way it's written now, the city is providing human resource services and serving as the employer of record for the Seed Mission employees, which are those devoted solely to the Seed purpose. They are city employees for all intents and purposes, but the pass-through will be made to the district for their costs. We're going to follow the city's personnel policies. This is the part, number 4, that we might need to change depending on how we feel about it. So the city manager in A has the sole authority and responsibility for disciplinary action, including termination arising from a violation of the City of Sweetwater Personnel Policy Manual, and will notify the board president about the general nature of any action taken. And then B, the board shall have input on matters arising from performance issues and duties related to economic development work product, shall have input on the initial hiring decision of the executive director. So any questions on that, or do we need to change that language any?
I think the language needs to be changed so that the city manager does not have the sole authority, but under the guidance, direction, something of the board, that he would have the authority to do that. So in other words, the wording needs to say, at the direction of the board, the city manager could do all those personnel items at the discretion of the board or instruction of the board, or however you want to word it.
David, what's your take on that?
It sounds like what's being suggested mirrors the onboarding process of bringing the employee on, with the advice of the recommendation. I think what we said to the seed board, the city manager shall process the hiring or something like that. Perhaps with kind of on the other end of it, it should be very, very similar, where the seed board would make that recommendation to the city manager, and the city manager would carry that out.
I guess my only caution on that is that if you have an employee, and you know, obviously not the current employee, but if you have an employee who violates
Thank you.
They violate the personnel policy manual for whatever reason, that's the city's personnel policy manual and the city's liability. I really don't know that if I were advising the city, I would advise the city that whether or not you terminate that employee should be dictated by another governmental entity, right? I mean, I don't think we do that with a county, right? I mean, you know, that if we had an interlocal agreement, you know, we're gonna take care of our employees and you take care of your employees. Well, this one's just a little bit different because the city's the employer of record. In reality, if you meet with the board in executive session on a personnel matter and you say, look, this employee did this, this, and this, they may or may not have an issue with it, but if they say we don't care, you know, we want to keep that employee, you're going to have an issue. And my feeling is the city manager has to have the authority to act in that situation, because depending on the violation, it's imperative that he be able to act in that situation.
And this doesn't come in play unless there is a violation of the personnel policy manual.
Yeah, it's not a performance issue. It's not that they're not doing their job in economic development. It's that, look, this person violated policy XYZ, and we have a zero tolerance for that. I mean, think of any personnel policy violation that can occur. It could be they tested positive for an illegal substance, that they engaged in harassing behavior, that, I mean, you know, think of whatever it might be. And I understand the board wanting to retain some authority on that, but the reality of it is they didn't violate a board policy. They violated a personnel policy of the city, who's on the hook for whatever that might be.
Is there a way to word that so that the board is informed before the city manager takes that action, so that we're not, for lack of a better term, cold-cocked with it, you know, at the next board meeting, which could be up to 30 days past when it happened?
Yeah, let me take a stab on it.
It says that there'll be notification to the board president about the general nature of the disciplinary action taken in,
But it doesn't say before.
well, we could insert prior to any disciplinary action being taken,
Okay.
and if we needed to, we could call an emergency meeting of the MDD board.
That would address what I'm
Okay.
referring to.
Can we insert that, please, sir?
Yes.
And we are talking about hypothetical process.
Yeah.
Cause this seat's getting really
Let's
warm.
look. And the reason why it says general nature is because, again, this is one of those tricky situations where personnel matters of the city are confidential, and so the city manager can generally tell the board the nature of the action to be taken and why. But if there's other persons involved, there's also privacy concerns and confidentiality that has to be accounted for. So I've rewritten it to take out sole authority and just have it say the city manager shall have the authority and responsibility for disciplinary action. And I want to stress responsibility too, because it's not just a question of authority. The city manager has a responsibility, if he has an employee who has violated personnel policy, and he can't disregard that responsibility. Including termination arising from a violation of the City of Sweetwater Personnel Policy Manual. City manager shall notify the board president about the general nature of any disciplinary action prior to action being taken. Now, at that point, you have to read that, I think, in conjunction with the fact that your board president can call a special call meeting. So if he gets a notification from the city manager, hey, something happened, this is as much as I can tell you, board president might say, well, can I call a special call meeting and you brief the board as much as you can in an executive session so they understand what's going on. I mean, in reality, that's how that, I would think, would go down. Happen though. Never gonna happen, but if it did. Is everybody comfortable with that as rewritten?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So on number 5, it's talking about other employees, and it doesn't reference any notification to the board, and we might want to rewrite this as well, and have that be the executive director with upon consultation with city manager. Because if the person's going to report, if the other employees report to the executive director, David, is that how that should be worded? Shall be
The shared responsibility.
I wasn't certain how many employees there were, so I wasn't comfortable doing that. But if we want, we could say shall be the responsibility of the executive director. After consultation with and the consent of the city manager.
That's fine.
Just to ask a question, is there a reason why number 5 shouldn't be worded basically the same as number 4?
It's a subordinate employee. I mean, it's not the executive director. I mean, it can be written like that, but if your executive director is over that employee, then my assumption is the executive director will brief the board, or the board president or whatever, however that relationship is currently. This is trying to lock down the responsibilities between the city and the board. So if your executive director is having trouble with one of the employees assigned to seed, he's going to talk to the board most likely, and he's going to talk to the city manager, but he's got to have the consent of the city manager because it's a city employee if he wants to terminate that individual and get somebody else in. So what he does between he and the board, is that's under your rules of operation on that. I mean, we can put it here if you want it here. We can just add the board here. Is that better? The hiring, supervision, performance evaluation, termination of seed mission employees other than the executive director shall be the responsibility of the executive director after consultation with and the consent of the board and city manager.
Looks good.
Yes, that sounds better.
What if, Dan, in the case where the board and the city manager don't agree on that, and there's a split there?
Well, it's a city employee. I mean, that's
Yeah,
the bottom line on any of these things,
Yeah.
is that, if it's a person that needs to go, I think it depends, like, up above, we were very specific in delineating that if it's personnel policy manual violation, that the city manager is gonna have that authority. So, I didn't go into that level of detail with these other employees, but it's, it's inferred. I mean, if a city employee violates a city personnel policy, situation, then I think the board needs to be informed to the extent possible. But at the end of the day, it's a city employee, and it's going to have to be the city manager's decision at that point. Well, it's actually it's the executive director, but they're going to be answering to the city manager on that thing. I guess here's the reality of this discussion, whether it's been done this way or not. This has always been your rule. When you're a 4A corporation and the city's your employee of record, whether it was handled this way or not, this is always the way it should have been handled. And this was the reality that those employees have worked in, whether anyone was aware of it or not. You've just had really good employees, and these situations haven't come up. And so, again, we're simply planning worst case scenario situations here and trying to, the best of our ability, define how that's going to happen if it ever happens, so we're not scrambling. You know, my assumption too, this is mostly for the board. I mean, my assumption coming into this, because I don't have a history with the corporation, is that you had a services agreement between the corporation and the city that had all of this in there, or similar things to this in there, because that's what is typical between a corporation and a city when the city is the employer of record. Now, if you didn't, that's fine, and we can't do anything about that now, but we are going to have it going forward. But the rules are not changing from my perspective. If one of your current employees or previous employees ever violated a city policy, personnel policy, I would almost assure you that Mr. Vela would take care of it and let the board know. In number 6, it is stating that it is up to the board how many positions and job descriptions and salary range you want for personnel, but it would be based in part on recommendation from the city's employer of record. Part of the reason for that, well, then it goes on in more detail talking about performance-related criteria, available funding consistent with the city's compensation plan strategies and situations, so on and so forth. And the reason for that is most cities, I don't know exactly with Sweetwater because I don't know your total number of employees, but for the city overall, but cities tend to band their compensation in tiers. And so if you have a person who is let's say you end up needing somebody to maintain properties owned by the district. So you need somebody to do general maintenance rather than having a city employee perform that. So you want to hire your own, but you want to pay him, $4 more per hour than the same position or comparable position is being paid in the city. Well, the city might want to talk to you about that because they're going to be the employer of record for that person, and they can't really justify somebody doing the same thing being paid more because the seed board is more generous than the city commission, hypothetically. So that's why that's in there, that you need to consult with the city on salaries and how many employees and that stuff. Does that make sense? Because David, there was some talk at one point about a potential project on the horizon. I mean, is that something that's common knowledge that down the road that might have maintenance requirements?
There's a possibility coming off of the Parks Master Plan for several quality of life type projects that the MDD would most likely take the lead on, and the city could help by laying water lines, those types of things, clearing brush. We have the equipment for that. Is that kind of what you're referring to?
Yeah, I didn't want to say anything because I'm in a public meeting and I didn't know what was public. So for example, in that type of scenario, 5 years down the road, it might be that the district needs more personnel or needs to fund additional personnel because the district still has a role in a project that it was responsible for putting together. So right now you have an executive director, one employee, but I don't assume for a second that it's going to stay like that if y'all are as successful with these things as everyone believes. The under personnel general duties, these are just what the city is agreeing to do. And a lot of this will be done through the executive director. Remember, he is a city employee, so most of these things are additional things that are going to come through your staff to you. The city's committee to provide sufficient staff for your programs, prepare a budget for the forthcoming year for review and final approval by the board. So you'll need to go through these and make sure you're comfortable with what folks are committing to.
Dan, if I can ask on number 4 on preparing a budget, is this stating that the city prepares the budget or the executive director as a city staff prepares the budget?
That's correct. Yeah, so when the city is agreeing here, some of these things are going to be done by the staff that you are paying. That's correct.
Thank you.
Now, the reason why it doesn't specify just the executive director, because a budget, he's going to, I think, rely on finance staff for assistance in putting that together as well, because he's got to get the projections on sales.
Thank you.
Would there be a possibility of putting verbiage in 3, 4, and 6, and 12, stating that with the leadership of the executive director or some kind of wording, so it's not so vague that the city would, maybe when we're down the road 10 or 15, 20 years, that the city thinks they need to provide all that without the executive director being involved.
Yeah, I'm looking through these to see if there's a way to just put it at the very beginning.
And even number 8 probably would need to be.
And 11.
And 11.
So I added at the very beginning, and instead of just saying the executive director, I put, we used the term, or I used the term earlier, seed mission employees. And so I repeated it here, that the city, through the seed mission employees, agrees to. And so, to me, that can be read 2 different ways. Either that those employees will be carrying out the following tasks, or they will be doing that. The city will be seeing that these are done through coordination with the seed mission employees.
And as you have said, Dan, I think this is looking at a partnership, and some of this stuff is just trying to address the worst case scenario, and hopefully we won't be facing that. But we always have to be protected for it.
As far as number 6, that we don't have to, I mean, that's for y'all to work out with the city. I don't know what the numbers are. I don't know what's currently being done. It wouldn't be anything different than what's currently being done as far as the current budget year, because it's already in process. So those should be numbers that are known, on the city side that can be plugged in. On these other ones, on the city deal, I think we've addressed your concerns by putting through the city mission employees agrees to do these things. The only thing I would say on that, and I think it's fine, I think it covers the district, but what I guess I hadn't really looked at it from the perspective that was voiced, or the concern that was voiced, that the city would see that this is theirs to do down the road. Because it's, first of all, it's year to year, but secondly, my whole thing was trying actually it was the other way around, to making sure that the board was getting everything done that they needed done through the interlocal with the city. But I do see the concerns, and I think by stating that the city, through the city mission employees, which right now we are too, is going to see that these things are accomplished. And this list, this is not, this is, you know, I came up with this, so there might be things that don't need to be on here, or there might be things that need to be on this list of 12 that are not. This is the board's list and the city's list. So if there's other activities or things that need to be captured, then we need to do so. And I haven't, and also on this interlocal, David and I have not had an opportunity to kick things back and forth, because I put this together at the end of the week, during the weekend, and got it to him. So. Again, number 6 is just these are the costs that go back to the city for those employees, and anything else, like if the district. So this is something that will be dealt with in a separate interlocal, but the district owns. This is just the services interlocal. The district will. Well, let me back up. The corporation owns assets, right? The corporation has real property, and it has some personal property, I believe. And the way the code is written, the assets of the corporation go to the city. Well, including the undesignated fund balance. The intention of the city, to my knowledge, is that those assets are going to be held and moved back to the district over the next few months. This won't happen overnight. So if that's true of the real property as well, then at some point there'll be insurance and things that the district will pick up the funding for, that right now the corporation is picking up the funding for. And so that will all be coordinated, but that's why there's a second blank on insurance premiums and things for seed-owned properties under the city self-insurance plan. My assumption when I put this together is that's how those are insured now. If that's not how those are insured now, then we can make that adjustment if the district is going to do that separately on its own. Is that accurate, David?
Yes, sir.
Okay. On legal services, this is placed in here. We did, as you know, at the meeting yesterday, have a letter of representation in front of you so that we could Ken could access us as needed during the transition. Going forward, I mean, the district can hire any attorney it wants. I mean, they're not limited. You're not limited. Just like the corporation, you can retain any counsel that you choose to at any point in time for any project. If you want to utilize the city attorney that the city has in place, or any special counsel retained by the city, you can do so if the attorney agrees to that representation. And then those costs are just passed through the city, separate from any other representation. Like for my purposes, anything related to MDD business or the transition or anything such as that, that bill's still gonna go to the city, but it's gonna be separated out from the bill for any work done for the city of Sweetwater. That's how that works. And I would assume if the city attorney does work for the district, that's how that would be done as well. And then, you know, you can still hire anybody else you want at any time. This was just really put in there as a convenience to the district, if you needed legal assistance and wanted to utilize the city attorney or our firm to do so. This is just the standard provisions on termination and amendments, but it's a year-to-year deal. It's gonna auto-renew unless you give notice of termination. 90 days is fairly standard. On this type of agreement, you're gonna know long before that if you're wanting to separate from the city. And I would encourage the district in the future that if that's ever the track you go down, that's at least a 6-month planning process, if not longer. So just keep that in mind. These are just your standard provisions in interlocal agreement. Yeah, I've got termination. Any other questions on this?
Do we need specific dollar amounts, for Article 5B, 1 and 2 before we approve?
You do not, but you need to make that clear in your motion that needs to be, that needs known. And I don't think it's, David, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not an unknown number, as far as the corporation goes, and it shouldn't be changing drastically, but you could do approximately as well.
We've got those numbers, and what we can do, like you said, is make that motion, kind of fill in the blank afterwards, and then once we execute the agreement, we'll have those numbers in there. Would that work, Dan?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the whole idea is simply that for the remainder of this fiscal year, that funding is going to correspond with the budgeted funding for the corporation, for whatever those services were to the corporation.
Dan, if I might ask just a couple quick questions outside of these agreements. Would we need to have a new separate budget carrying forward for the last 5-6 months of whatever operation we're gonna have between being established now and September 30th? And then a second, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, yeah, I was agreeing with you, yes.
Oh, okay.
I sent Ken a preliminary, kind of a checklist of things, a to-do list really is what it is, for both the corporation and city, transition on that side, and then trying to get the district up and running. But yes, that is accurate. Really what you would need to do just for the remainder of this fiscal year is adopt a budget to fill that gap. It's gonna be based largely on whatever your approved budget was for the corporation would be my guess.
All right, thank you. And second
Because
question,
ultimately,
go ahead.
I think it's an important question, because what's not on the agenda today, but what will be on the board, the district board's agenda when they set a meeting, will be some of those very things, including, you know, when the board has to, you still have work to do as a corporation too. So when you meet as a corporation, you're basically gonna be assigning the performance agreements that you have and some of your other agreements that you have in place, whether it's equipment leases and things such as that, those are gonna have to be assigned to the district. When you meet as the district board, you're gonna have to be accepting those. And so, yeah, you're gonna have to work with the city in trying to make certain that those budgetary items are accounted for as they move from the corporation and it closes out all of its assets and winds up business and closes up shop, that those we don't miss something moving that over to the district. That's really all we're trying to do.
And yes, you and I will be working on that, and I appreciate your willingness to do that. Secondly, on the front page of the rules of operation, you use the actual Sweetwater Economic Development. That's the marketing piece that we've been using for about the last 7 years. Is that something we can still use?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you can. So here, that's a great question, Ken, and so as a corporation, as you know, I mean, that's almost like a service mark that you have, but the corporation's going away. As a district, we don't really have to do that. The one thing we do have to do is, as a municipal development district, that's always gonna be the tagline, right? You're always gonna be a municipal development district, just like, think of it this way, you were the Sweetwater Enterprise for Economic Development, Inc., and now you're the Sweetwater Enterprise for Economic Development, MDD. So you can still use that from our perspective.
All right, thank you.
Should, really. You've got a lot invested in.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Dan, one question. Just noticing on the signatory pages of the two agreements, one is signed by the mayor, the other is signed by the city manager. Is that okay, or do they need to be consistent signatories?
It can be either, the city manager typically signs interlocals in most cities, but not, if he hasn't been authorized to, then it would need to be the mayor. If you're talking about the interlocal agreement.
Yes.
The rules of operation, I think we had signed by the mayor because the governing body has to approve them. But it's whatever's consistent on your end, really. Do you normally sign interlocals, David?
I don't know that I've signed one yet, but for these purposes, maybe the mayor should sign both documents.
Certainly.
Dan, at what point is Seed, the corporation, considered defunct? When will that occur?
When all their obligations are met and all their assets are disposed of, then we'll send there's a checklist in the local government code. Basically, it's not called that, but there's a list of things that have to be done. And once we've worked with Ken and David to get all of those completed, then we'll send a notification to the Secretary of State and the Comptroller, letting them know that it has ceased, and that the tax will then cease to be collected. And the intent is that by the time that is done, that we will have met as a board for the district and adopted the tax, levied the tax that will go in its place, so that those are seamless.
So technically, we Seed board members are sitting on two boards at this time, Seed and MDD.
That's correct.
So we will have to designate which meeting we're calling to order.
Yes, it's gonna be fun. Hey, on a positive, very, very positive note, I mean, in this, y'all, honestly, pat yourselves on the back and give credit to your voters, because y'all are the first 4A corporation to make this transition in 2 elections, and accomplish everything that we would hope you would accomplish in getting it into ETJ, because there's no way to do that in just doing it in one election. So kudos to Sweetwater for being trailblazers, for sure. even though it's gonna be, interesting and difficult to, yes, wear a couple of hats and get those wound up and get the other one up and running.
I'd like to move approval of the interlocal agreement with the dollar amounts in 5B, 1 and 2 to be entered later.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I'll now read the resolution into the record. A resolution adopting the interlocal agreement between the City of Sweetwater and the Sweetwater Municipal Development District. Now therefore to be resolved, I, Mayor Jim McKenzie, and the City Commission of the City of Sweetwater hereby adopt this resolution adopting the interlocal agreement between the City of Sweetwater and the Sweetwater Municipal Development District on the 8th day of May, 2018. Now I need to call for a motion for adjournment.
I move we adjourn the combined joint meeting.
We have a question first.
That interlocal now come to the board, the
It still has to be
MDD
approved by
board?
the
Yes, sir,
governing
yes, sir.
body
It
for
comes to
this.
y'all to be approved.
Good, thank you.
You got a motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor?
Thank you, Billy. I appreciate everybody in the room being patient with that.
Thank y'all for being here.
Can I get out of this hot seat?
Yes, sir, yes, sir.
Need water.
Pour a bucket on him.
Take a few minute break or just keep on?
Y'all wanna take a couple of minutes break? Yeah. And then we'll start up on the other?
2 hours.
Well, he gets paid by the hour.
That's right, you know, it pays the same.
At least stand up for a second.
Everybody's kind of stretching. Look at that.